Ready in court? Superior Court back in session. Seated.
Thanks for reminding witness and having courtesy this morning. You are still on.
Thank you.
Is it at all possible that the last question read back?
I'll read off the last question. Doctor, based upon the question that just happened, I want to direct your attention to Exhibit T, which we're just going to skip ahead based upon the judge's questions.
Okay. Hearing on Exhibit T. Exhibit T. Doctor, you have before you what is remarked as defendant's Exhibit T. Do you see that?
I do.
Does the judge have a copy? Thank you. Doctor, we had just talked about masking, source control. I'm directing your attention to Exhibit T, entitled Assessment of Respiratory Function in Infants and Young Children Wearing Face Masks During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Is that what's before you, Doctor?
Yes.
And Doctor, I believe this article was published on March 2nd, 2021.
Yes.
Doctor, is this document, you had testified earlier that you used the data dashboards and various articles to help formulate your opinions with respect to the executive orders and the Rhode Island Department of Health's regulation. Was this document one of the documents that was utilized?
This document is referenced in the CDC science brief, and so it's one of the references in the section of adverse health effects in children that the CDC used.
And when you talk about the CDC science brief, Doctor, are you talking about Exhibit B that we were just testifying about?
Yes, I'm talking about Exhibit B.
So, Doctor, looking at Exhibit T, first I asked, do you recognize this Exhibit T?
I do.
How do you recognize it, Doctor?
It's an article that I read.
And Doctor, did you read this article in the ordinary course of your business at the Rhode Island Department of Health?
I did.
Your Honor, I asked for Exhibit T, you get full.
No objection to your letter. T is one.
Thank you, Steve Full. I'm sorry, defendant Steve Full. Thank you. All right, Your Honor. Excuse me. All right, Dr. McDonald. You indicated that Exhibit T was referenced in Exhibit B. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Looking solely at Exhibit T, assessing the respiratory function of infants and young children. Can you please explain what information in Exhibit T you relied upon in helping to formulate your opinions with respect to the executive order and the Rhode Island Department of Health regulation?
So it's an article published in the Journal for the American Medical Association. And so what the authors are trying to answer is, the question they had was, face masks have been recommended, but they wanted to see if there's any adverse effects on children, where there's a problem with them inhaling oxygen, or is there any respiratory distress? That was the big question. So they looked at 47 infants and young children in Italy, and they had them wear a surgical mask for half an hour, and they noticed there weren't any adverse effects. So that they concluded that the use of surgical masks among children would be an effective strategy, especially when they considered that schools were opening. So it was a decent study. It looked at some children under the age of 2, and looked at kids up to the age of 12. And they looked at data from May through June of 2020.
Doctor, you had just testified that face masks were recommended. Who were you referencing when you say that face masks were recommended for children?
They were recommended by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and also by the American Academy of Pediatrics.
If you know, as you stand here today, does the Center for Disease Control and the American Academy of Pediatrics recommend mask wearing in the K-12 setting?
Yes, they still recommend that.
Doctor, based upon your training, education, and experience, and your role as a public health official, can you offer an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not mask wearing affects children and adults differently or the same?
I can offer an opinion.
Doctor, what is that opinion?
I see no reason why they'd be different in adults than children.
Doctor, what information do you use to formulate that opinion?
Well, I based it on a lot of the information I got from the CDC science brief, but also the studies that they referenced, in particular in the adverse health effects. I actually went into the science brief, and there's a section titled Adverse Health Effects, and so I actually read every study that they referenced. I don't usually read every study in a review article, but I did in this one because I wanted to see where they were drawing the conclusions from. So it's actually references 57 through 63, and they look at these studies, they look at different groups of people. They look at children, they look at people with lung disease, look at people who normally would have healthy lungs, healthcare workers, and they looked at people who were exercising, and they didn't see a change in anyone. So I think their conclusion has merit, and I found it persuasive.
Doctor, just to clarify, for the record, you had referenced 57 to 63 in a section titled Adverse Health Effects of Mask Wearing. Is that from Exhibit B?
Yes.
Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, based upon your training, education, and experience, and your role as a public health official, can you offer an opinion to a degree of medical certainty as to whether or not the observational studies that have been done with adults concerning masking would have a different effect with children and masking?
I can offer an opinion.
Doctor, what is that opinion?
I don't think there'd be a difference.
Doctor, why do you say that there wouldn't be a difference? And
When you
this-
look at all the studies in particular, they looked at children and adults, and they're different authors with the same question. So when you look at 8 different studies, looking at different populations, and they all find independently that there aren't adverse effects, I find that persuasive.
Thank you, Doctor. Right, I'm now going to go to Exhibit R, which is another science group. Just trying to find a what has been pre-marked as Defendant's Exhibit R, a science brief transmission of SARS-CoV-2 in K-12 schools and early care and educational programs. Do you see that, Doctor?
I do.
Doctor, what is this document?
It's a review article published by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention.
And Doctor, do you recognize this document?
I do.
How do you recognize this document?
It's a document that I used as part of formulating my decisions and opinions regarding whether masks would be a good idea for kids in school.
Thank you, Doctor. And when you say forming your opinion as to whether masks would be good in school, are you referencing the executive orders and the the Rhode Island Department of Health Regulation.
I am.
Your Honor, I ask that Exhibit R be moved in full.
No objection. R is full.
Doctor, looking at Exhibit R, can you please tell the court what date this article was published?
It's published in its updated version, July 9, 2021.
And doctor, specifically, what information in the CDC-produced literature that is before you in Exhibit R was relevant in helping you formulate your opinion regarding the use of masks in the K-12 setting for both the executive order and for the Rhode Island Department of Health Regulation?
So this is a review article. They looked at 98 different studies. You know, one of the things that you see really up front with this is everyone recognized that kids do better in school, physically, emotionally, and educationally. And they cite some studies to say that not only do kids do better in school, but if younger children, 0 to 4, are in an early childhood education program, it affects the ability of parents to work, have child care issues. So it was the right group of people that I wanted to learn about, and they referenced several studies. When you look about the rest of this, it talks about how the disease is spread. There's a section about schools and SARS-CoV-2 transmission. So a lot of studies are referenced that just talk about children do get SARS-CoV-2 and COVID, but when there's measures in place to prevent the spread, children acquire this generally from the community. And then when you have a layered prevention approach in schools, you really minimize the spread of the virus in the schools. There's another section to talk about, there's not just students in school, there's staff, and teachers. And it's important to understand that there's studies that look at transmission in that regard well, and that when there's a layered prevention approach, you minimize transmission from the students to the teachers, and the teachers and the staff to the students. When you really get right down to it, what they concluded was it's really a layered prevention approach. And they talked about getting to what were their recommendations towards the end. And they list all the different strategies they would recommend, which is one, you should vaccinate everybody when they're eligible, but they recognize as long as people age 12 and older can be vaccinated. They recommended consistent correct use of masks. They recommended physical distancing, doing screening tests in schools, make sure we're working on ventilation, and other recommendations as well. So the conclusion is, you really can minimize the spread of SARS in schools in these early childhood education settings if you take this layered approach at prevention.
And doctor, the layered approach to prevention is with respect to COVID-19, correct?
That's correct.
And the factors that are make up a layered approach to prevention are what?
Well, they list them as, there's several different strategies listed. One is making sure those who are eligible for vaccination get vaccinated. The second one they mentioned is consistent and correct use of masks. The third one is physical distancing, screening and testing, in other words, screening testing, make sure the ventilation works well, hand washing, respiratory etiquette, make sure people stay home when they're sick, contact tracing, isolation, quarantine, and then routine cleaning of your building.
Thank you, doctor. Doctor, I don't know which exhibits are before you now, but whatever you have, can you have that, please? And give them to Melissa. Did you need to review it? No, it's not now. Right, yes. Doctor, you've been handed what is pre-marked as Defendant's Exhibit S. Doctor, what is this that you've been handed?
So this is a publication from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. It's Morbidity and Mortality Report. It's titled Outbreak of SARS-CoV-2 Infections, including COVID-19 vaccine breakthrough infections, associated with large public gatherings, Barnstable County, Massachusetts, July 2021.
Doctor, do you recognize this document?
I do.
Doctor, how do you recognize this document?
I read it.
Your Honor, I ask that this exhibit be returned in full.
At this point, you know, I'm trying not to do it proceed too much to move along here, but I have to object. I don't know what the relevance is. This was a study of the outbreak in Provincetown amongst adult, mostly homosexual men who had mostly been vaccinated, and apparently there was an outbreak of COVID even though they were vaccinated. What possible relevance does that have to mask the kids in school and all that?
That's exactly the relevance, Your Honor. If vaccinated people can still spread it, having people who are unvaccinated wearing masks helps prevent that spread. That's the whole point of these proceedings, is what steps are necessary to help protect the children. And if you're vaccinated and you can spread it, then we need to have masks on for children so that the unvaccinated children, those under 12, can't spread it. And it also affects the children's age group from 12 to 18, 53% who are vaccinated but can still spread the disease in an academic setting, causing community spread.
Before putting the article in as a full exhibit and having its conclusion already as in full evidence, when we build this, any expert opinion, through testimony first and then with the exhibit in full at the end, testimony should be
Your Honor, I'm sorry, but the ambulance or police car did not hear that.
The court reserves on making it full. Why don't you just build this testimony and then we can go back to whether it should be full.
Doctor, with respect to Exhibit S, can you please explain, Doctor, put Exhibit S down, please. Doctor,
I have it.
I know you can't look at it right now, it's not in full.
Okay, okay.
So please look again, thank you. Doctor, with respect to Exhibit S regarding the outbreak of COVID-19 in Barnstable County, can you please tell us why that information was relevant to you in your position as a public health official?
Yes. So it was relevant. This actually made the news. It was,
That was, you asked a question, and that's going to be out of question.
Yes, this is the answer.
Doctor, you could explain.
Yes, so this made the news. It was a big story. Because after this article came out and got published, the director of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention made a change in recommendation, which was that even fully vaccinated people should be wearing masks. It was kind of a dramatic study because in Barnstable County, they actually had almost no cases of COVID right before July 3rd. So they were very low prevalence. I think it was maybe 3 cases the week before. They actually saw this escalate quite a bit though, like 469 cases over a 2-week period. And if I recall correctly, about 79% were in fully vaccinated people. And I think 5 people I recall were admitted to the hospital. 4 of them were fully vaccinated. So this was a study that got everyone's attention, and that's why it made the national news.
Doctor, with respect to this study regarding mostly the vaccinated population in Massachusetts, can you offer an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty based upon your training, education, and experience as to why the information in this article, Exhibit S, is relevant to a masking mandate in a K-12 setting? Can you offer an opinion with respect to that?
Yes.
What is that opinion, Doctor?
So prior to this study, the recommendation was that fully vaccinated people did not need to wear a mask indoors. After this study, and because of this study, where fully vaccinated people were at these large indoor gatherings and outdoor gatherings, and so many got infected, since the Center for Disease Control and Prevention made a change based on this study that fully vaccinated people should be wearing a mask indoors, it was a very telling study because we know that some of the students who go to schools aged 12 to 18, 53% of them are vaccinated. Yet having them wear a mask still is in line with the CDC recommendations.
Doctor, does the study as a whole provide information as to whether or not a vaccinated individual can still spread COVID-19?
Yes.
Can you please explain what the conclusion is with respect to whether or not a vaccinated person can still spread COVID-19?
I think this, I'm going to project it, but that's an answer.
Yes, vaccinated people can spread COVID-19. It was something they looked at in the study. One of the things they pointed out is the cycle thresholds for people who were vaccinated and had COVID-19, people who were unvaccinated with COVID-19, their cycle threshold numbers weren't different.
Doctor, how does this study specifically connect the masking mandate in the K-12 setting?
So one of the questions that we had to consider was, should we let students who are fully vaccinated not wear masks in school? That was a question we needed to answer. But when you look at this study, it's hard to make that recommendation because in this situation, what you see is vaccinated people who are unmasked are spreading COVID-19. So it therefore makes sense that fully vaccinated students should still wear face masks because we don't have herd immunity yet.
Your Honor, I ask that Exhibit S be moved in full now.
Judge, I'm confused. We went through so much testimony about why it's important to get people vaccinated. Because kids are not vaccinated, they present a greater risk, and that's why we're masking. Now, we're saying vaccinations don't matter for spreading COVID, so are we just throwing out all that prior evidence, that testimony from this expert, that unvaccinated, the reason you are masking kids in school is because they're unvaccinated? He just contradicted his own, all of his prior testimony. So pick a lane. Are we going to introduce S, throw everything else out, or keep everything else out and throw it S? I don't understand.
Your Honor, COVID-19 is
The world which Dr. McDonald and the governor has lived in for a few years has changed often. And here what it has, this Exhibit S shows a change in the way the CDC is going to treat masking. The doctor just testified that the relevance is the masking protocol changed by the CDC as a result of this. He also showed how it influenced him in coming to conclusions concerning masking, all of which are subject to cross-examination. I'm not saying it's logical or appropriate, I'm just saying it's relevant. So therefore, Exhibit S is relevant, and S is full, subject to cross-examination.
Thank you.
Yes.
Doctor, I just want to give Exhibit S back to Melissa. Doctor, prior to the study that was done with respect to Exhibit S, did you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not a vaccinated individual should be wearing a mask to help prevent the spread of COVID-19?
Yes,
What was that opinion prior to the study?
that fully vaccinated people did not need to wear masks.
Then the study came out, Exhibit S. And when the study came out with Exhibit S, what was learned from that study with respect to vaccinated people and wearing masks?
What was clear is we're not at herd immunity, not by a long shot. And what you see is when you put, in that study, 79% of the people who were infected were vaccinated. That's clearly not enough to have herd immunity. What you saw was when you put these folks in large indoor gatherings and large outdoor gatherings, they still spread the virus from one person to the other. And keep in mind, they largely did better because they were vaccinated, so they had better health outcomes. Yet what it demonstrates, though, is that the Delta virus is very contagious, very easy for someone to get infected, and very easy for even a fully vaccinated individual to spread from themselves to someone else who could be unvaccinated or fully vaccinated.
So, Doctor, can you mark to a reasonable degree of medical certainty on your training, education, and experience as to what the point of getting the vaccine is if you can still spread the disease while fully vaccinated?
Yes.
What is that opinion, Doctor?
So vaccine,
Your Honor, I'm going to object. I mean, we're not here on whether or not there should be a vaccine mandate. That's a case for another day. In another context of health care workers, we're here about masking. So whether or not he has an opinion about whether vaccines work or how well they work is really irrelevant, I think, in this case.
Your Honor, if I may, it's completely relevant because what we're looking at here is a new emerging disease with Delta. Initially, the CDC, the APA, and the doctors under the opinion that, hey, once we get vaccinated, we're going to be okay. But now with Delta came, it changed the landscape. And so that is why being vaccinated and wearing masks older being vaccinated. So it goes to why someone who is vaccinated in that age group still must wear a mask in an academic setting, which is the exact point of this hearing. If I can offer a piece of proof, Your Honor, the doctor would testify.
I'm trying to take what you gave me as well. But you continue.
Dr. McDonald will testify, Your Honor, that the vaccine helps prevent people from getting really, really sick. It's similar to the flu vaccine. We get it, you can still get the flu, but you're not going to get it as badly. It's a similar concept. And so that's why vaccines and masking go together in an academic setting, which is why we're here.
I thought the question was whether we had an opinion as to whether or not, why is it so a good idea to get the vaccine? Okay? We don't get the sick.
Actually, I'd like a question like that, sorry.
Question. So, doctor, can you offer an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty based upon your training, education, and experience as to what the point of getting the vaccine is if you can still spread the disease while fully vaccinated?
The objection system.
Dr. You testified earlier that approximately 53% of the K through 12, those over the age of 12 in the K through 12 setting are fully vaccinated.
Yes.
Doctor, based upon your training, education, and experience, can you offer an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not students in a K through 12 setting over the age of 12 who are vaccinated can still spread COVID-19?
Yes.
What is that opinion, doctor?
They can still spread COVID-19.
Doctor, how do you know that children in a K through 12 setting over the age of 12 who are vaccinated can still spread COVID-19?
Because the vaccine's really good at protecting people from dying and really good at ending up in the hospital. It's good at preventing that. It's also very good at preventing people from getting disease, but it's not 100%. No vaccine is. And we know that when people get infected with SARS-CoV-2, they're contagious and they can spread it from one person to the other. So therefore, we know that students who are fully vaccinated could spread from themselves to someone else.
I'm going to strike. The answer was why he thinks vaccines are good, which was just objective to and sustained. The question was whether children who are vaccinated in school can still spread COVID. His answer doesn't match up with the question. He tried to answer the previous question about why vaccines are a good idea. The simple question was, can children ages 12 to 17 or 18 in school who are vaccinated still spread COVID? Simple yes or no answer to that.
Now, I believe there was a follow-up question to that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I believe there was a follow-up question to that.
There was, he did answer a bit, and he went on with the answer stands. Motion strikes tonight.
Dr. McDonald, we talked at length about masking, preventative measures, how masks work. I'd like to direct your attention now to an allegation in the complaint. Are you aware? Have you reviewed the complaint in this case?
I did.
One of the issues in this case, and plaintiff's counsel will correct me if I'm wrong, is whether or not parents can make their own decisions as to whether or not their children should be masked when going into an academic setting. Does that sound familiar to you?
Yes.
Based upon your training, education, and experience, can you offer an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not all children in a K through 12 setting, regardless of vaccination status, should be masked or not?
Yes.
Doctor, what is that opinion?
That all students should be wearing a mask in K-12 settings.
Doctor, can you please explain the basis for your opinion that all children should be wearing a mask in a K-12 setting?
Judge Fitzgerald, I think he's explained that many times over the last few days in his testimony. Can I go over it again?
Your Honor, you did not explain the fact that many of the parents want to be able to make decisions to whether or not children can wear masks. The issue stems from the fact that masks really protect the public at large, not just the wearer.
He's already testified to that. You're correct. I thought you were getting into the parents now.
And I'm with you, Your Honor. I apologize.
Thank you.
Your Honor, just take one moment.
Yes.
Melissa? Yes. Is it possible for me to Carol? I'm sorry, I wasn't. Is this I'm sorry, Your Honor, misplaced milk. Because you have two. Okay, Melissa, can I just have exhibit 10? Okay, my phone's across there, and we have this one. Okay, Melissa, let me just get them all for you once. Mary, could I just have a moment, please? The missing notepad's causing some issues. Thank you, my kid. Melissa, yes. 8, 10, 15, 23, and 25. 15, yes. 23, yes. Yes. Okay, Doctor, you just been
Can we
handed.
try opening the window for a moment? See if we can hear ourselves. Can we try opening the window? A little bit.
I'm sorry.
Here come the buses. Here you go.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, I'd like to draw your attention to Plaintiff's Exhibit 8. Do you have that, Doctor?
I do?
It's entitled Delta Wave, Rhode Island Daily Pediatric Hospitalization.
Yes?
Doctor, this exhibit was introduced during plaintiff's direct examination of Dr. Boston. Do you recognize it?
I do?
Can you please, looking at the exhibit, can you please state when the exhibit date begins and ends?
It starts on August 1st, 2021, and it ends on October 4th, 2021.
Doctor, looking at that exhibit, can you please identify how many hospitalizations there were of pediatric patients prior to the emission of the executive order?
Yes, I can.
And how many is that, Doctor?
If I could have a moment to count.
Yes, I apologize.
So including up to August 19th, there's 19.
And Doctor, how about after August 19th? How many admissions were there?
Okay. There's 48.
Doctor, looking at this exhibit and knowing that there were 19 admissions before the August 19th executive order and 48 admissions after the executive order, what, if anything, does this plaintiff's exhibit 8 tell you?
It's talking about the number of children who were admitted to a hospital.
Objection, Your Honor. Just, I want to be clear, I'm sorry I didn't get the question. These are not new admissions. These are existing admissions. So I don't know that, I don't want the witness to be misinterpreted when he should already know as a health director. These are the daily census. How many patients are actually in the hospital on a given day? So there are not 19 cases prior to August 19th and 48 cases after. That's not what this document represents, and the witness should know this.
Doctor, looking at the exhibit now.
Good question for Cross. Go ahead.
Doctor, looking at the exhibit now and understanding what plaintiff's counsel just said, can you please clarify as to how many patients were in the hospital prior to the executive order?
But, you know, it's his exhibit. I mean, I don't think it's labeled very well, but it looks like it's average pediatric COVID-19 hospitalization. So he's saying there's generally 1, 2, or 3 or 4 kids in the hospital per day.
And does that number increase, Doctor, after the executive order?
Yes.
Doctor, I want to fast forward now to plaintiff's exhibit 10. You should have that in front of you.
I do.
Actually, Doctor, let's fast forward to plaintiff's exhibit 23. You should also have that in front of you.
20 what?
Three.
I'm sorry, 23?
Three, yes, 23. Doctor, do you have plaintiff's exhibit 23 in front of you?
I do.
Doctor, looking at plaintiff's exhibit 23, on the left-hand column, can you please identify the hyperlink that is listed there?
It says it's from slickdeals.net.
Doctor, as a medical professional, are you familiar with the website slickdeals.net?
No.
Doctor, as a medical professional, do you currently receive your medical literature from a website titled slickdeals.net?
No.
Doctor, as a medical professional in the Rhode Island Department of Health, have you ever received medical literature from a website entitled slickdeals.net?
No.
Your Honor, we still have some housekeeping measures. We have Dr. McDonald's resume that we need to introduce. I believe plaintiff's counsel has already agreed to that. Outside of that, the state would like an opportunity to just kind of pause and make sure we have all the exhibits entered into evidence. And I believe all the questions have been covered, but I would like a moment to confer with my co-counsel. So would it be possible to just wait to get Dr. McDonald's affidavit, which is being walked, resume, which is being walked over, and use that time to confer with co-counsel?
Sure, we're obviously going to need another day for Dr. McDonald.
Unfortunately, yes.
Are you near the end of your testimony?
I am, Your Honor.
Okay, we can break now for the day instead of make some request on
Hey, Your Honor, just so that the record's clear, if we can introduce that exhibit, Dr. McDonald's CV. There's obviously no objection. I don't know if we have to do it on the record or whenever we get it, if that's sufficient. I say it now.
And I appreciate that. It's still like an opportunity to make sure all the exhibits are done and an opportunity to confer with co-counsel.
Of course, no problem. So, can we break now for the day?
Thank you, Your Honor, yes.
We'll break now for the day and document conversation, okay? You're excused for the day.
Thank you, Your Honor. Oh, I'm sorry. Do we have a time for tomorrow?
Are we on tomorrow?
Why don't we talk? Don't we talk for a minute?
Can I move this here? No? Yes.
Court will stay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All rise. Course adjourned.
I'm sorry.